If you hear yelling or screams, you'll know we messed something up. That would be me, not Donna. That would be me.
I was going to say, if you wanted to move a little closer, but if I had the cushy chair,
I would move it up.
Yeah,
Do you want to start, Donna? Do you want me to start? Okay. So, welcome everybody. Today, we're doing What Is That Weed? And weed control methods. And if you happen to have a pesticide certification and you need a credit for attending, you will get a credit. What we will have you do is I'm going to pass around this form. You can put your name and your email. What else do they use as for? Yes. Yeah. So you can fill out that information. Also, if you can put, even if you're not looking for a credit, if you could put your name and email and town on here, then we can send you the bulletins that we highlight and the additional information that we highlight in the slideshow. The links. And so, also, if you'd like to sign up for the newsletter and you haven't already, or if you can just check those boxes, or if you're interested in food safety, food preservation, or pollinator gardening, you can check those as well. I'm going to put you all to work. I'm going to give you all these things, and I have a little pencil. You got a pen. Okay.
I'm asking about the pesticides certifications.
Yes, that's a very good question. I should talk about that. So, do you want to talk about it, Donna, or you want me to? So, in Maine, to apply pesticides, you need to be certified. So you have to take a test, and through the Board of Pesticides.
if you're selling food to eat.
If you're selling food to eat, and other things like for cannabis, or like if you're restricted use pesticide. I'm trying to think of like if you on the commercial side, small business.
If you've got a farm stand that you're selling, there's a dollar amendment. We may be visited by the guy from the Board of Pesticide Control, and he can fill you in. But we've got a website that we can send along and tell us how you can get the license.
And
It's a process of, you can get study materials from Extension, and then you can take a test and have the test sent to the local Extension office, and we send it on back down to Augusta. And once you pass the test, the cost
it's still 15, I believe.
and then every 3 years you only get 6 hours of recertification credits. So today it's 1 hour of recertification. You have to have the license.
Are you organic?
Organic folks, if you're spraying any organic pesticides and you're selling crops, that's still, there's a lower level license that you get, agriculture license instead of organic license. And that's because if you misuse like a sulfur spray and somebody's allergic to sulfur, you can cause some problems.
And that brings up a really good point, actually, that I'm going to talk about for just a quick second, is that even things you make at home, you're still creating a pesticide. So, if you see something on social media and it's like, oh, I'm just using my household ingredients, you're still creating a pesticide. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Because I think a lot of times, we just don't think about pesticides in that way, that, just because we made them ourselves, they can't be, harmful. That's something else to think about. So, just to do my last bit of housekeeping here, we have, the white card is going to be to evaluate usefulness of the information. one today. This orange one, it's very bright to get your attention so that I can keep asking you to fill it out. Is our demographic cards, and that's anonymous, but if you can fill that out as well, that helps us keep track to make sure that we're offering our programs to as wide an audience as possible. And then this blue card. The blue card is going to be the most important one today. That's not true. The demographic card is. But the blue one, even if you don't want to request additional information from us, you want to fill this out and put your name on here. We have a door prize today. And the door prize is, Donna's going to get it.
Not a weed?
Not a weed.
Not a weed.
Today. We figure you're going to have enough. Yes.
Invasive plant, field and records card.
Yes. So even if you don't want additional information, please fill out the blue. And I'm just going to, why don't I just let you all pass those around, and you can take one each, because I don't want to get us behind before we even get started. We did bring some printed bulletins today that are up at the front here, and I brought some soil test boxes as well in case you need one. And then we have some resources, some books up here that we'll talk about a little bit later on. And then I think that's it. But if you have any questions, please just stop me when you have them, and we'll talk about the questions right there. And we'll go ahead and get started. Did I introduce you, Donna? I did not. This is Donna.
You didn't introduce yourself?
I didn't. I'm not. So I'm Lori Bowen, and obviously I work for the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, and I'm here today with Donna Coffin, who I never know how to introduce you, Donna. Wait,
I work in Piscataquis and Thompson.
well, I was gonna go with you're the guru of all things weeds, and I was gonna really, but
The weed goddess?
the weed goddess. Ooh,
She's
that's
here.
Oh, I like that.
Not to be misunderstood as the weed goddess.
Well, we were
Maybe both.
we were hoping we would get some cannabis growers today, and because that always adds to the conversation and the questions, and it's a really interesting field. So we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. So it's really important, obviously, for gardeners and farmers as well, to start to be able to identify the common weeds, the ones we see the most. And so here, can you all see that, or is the sun glaring on it?
No.
Because I can't see it.
It's clear from here.
Okay, we're all good. Okay, awesome. But do you know what their names are? Does anyone want to take a guess on any of them?
Have you seen them?
Yes, have you seen them? I think we've all seen them at some point. It's kind of hard not to. The first one here, I think it's here, Galanzoga, and that is, it's very common, especially in vegetable gardens. And once it germinates, it's almost immediately flowering, and it sets seed. And that's why you see it so much, because it does so quickly set its seed and then spread the seeds. For annuals, we usually suggest preventing them from going to seed as a first line of defense. That's going to be your best bet, because if you can control them from going to seed and distributing it, you might have a fighting chance, so to speak.
What is it called?
Galanzoga.
What?
Want me to spell it?
Yes, please.
Click once, and you'll have
Oh, that's what it was there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
there it
look
is.
at
Okay.
that. This is fancy. This is Donna's PowerPoint. There we go. And then, I'll put on the next one. Any guesses on the other ones? No?
Is that pigweed?
For the number 2?
Yeah.
That is common ragweed.
Oh.
And if you have allergies,
That's
you're
it.
probably a little more familiar with that. And then we have purslane up there. And
I get that.
you got that one? Yes. That one?
Usually when We do this when Kate's in the audience, she
Uh-huh.
talks about eating it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Now
what
you
I
can,
was just
right?
going to say was, it was kind of funny, I'm not gonna say which one, but about 3 years ago, I was at a nursery, and this was for sale in pots, and it was in the culinary herbs section,
There you go.
so.
Hey,
yeah.
they're making money.
You may as well use it if you can, though,
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Like, you can use dandelions, you may as well.
This shows up a lot on social media. I see it a lot where it'll say, whatever you do, don't throw this weed away, don't take it out of your garden. Because people do eat it, and it's rich in vitamins and minerals. In this slide, we have a little note that, it's sweet revenge to eat them, because I'm gonna get back at them. And then we have lamb's quarter. And so these are pretty common. I mean, I think I see them even in parking lots and things in the median strips. I mean, they're pretty prolific. So what is a weed? Well, a weed is, it's a plant that's growing where we don't necessarily want it to at that time. So even though, normally a tomato plant, for instance, we want tomato plants, but if a tomato plant is growing in the middle of our corn patch, so I was thinking I've had tomatoes show up in my perennial beds and my flower beds, and I really want it there.
So like raspberries too, strawberries.
Yeah. I mean, and it's so hard to make that decision, like, oh, you don't belong here, you're not gonna be good for my section of garden, I'm gonna get rid of you, because you're like, oh, but it's growing. But it's a weed if it's growing where you don't particularly want it to be. And then, of course, if we talk about, like marigolds and foxglove, you're like, oh, but that would be great, they're wonderful. But what if they show up in the cucumber pot, right in the center of where you're trying to, even if you were trying to trellis or something like that. So a weed is not necessarily something that we always think of as bad. It's just something that's opportunistic and has shown up where we didn't necessarily want it to. So there are beneficial weeds, of course. Of course, we have flowers, and then we have our edible weeds. A lot of people will take some of those weeds too, now that I'm thinking about it, and make teas. I hear about a lot of teas. And actually, I went to a workshop once where the instructor was making us tea out of several of the weeds, and she doesn't mind the weeds because she harvests them first and in the early spring and makes the teas. But they do a good job, like for insect habitat and food. They can provide for those needs. The natural dyes to me are always really interesting. It's just a kind of a cool thing, like especially with like the goldenrods and it's woad. Yeah. Woad is really a cool one because you're not doing anything with the flowers, you're doing it with the leaves to make a blue dye. So they do have benefits. They also have the long roots that can bring up the elements, bring those closer to the surface so they're a little bit more available. They're also a good indicator of problems with the soil. You can figure out what might be going on. And I wrote down some examples because I was afraid I might forget them. But some of the examples that I had was quackgrass can indicate you've got improper iron and manganese ratio. Horsetails, if you've got a field of horsetails, it might indicate that you've got poorly drained soil with low pH. And then it can, then it would indicate to fix that. You could improve the drainage and increase the soil pH by lining it. So it can be like, help you figure out what's going on with your soil. So they're good. Weeds are good. They have a good purpose as well. But some of the disadvantages are going to be that they're competing with the plants you do want for nutrients and water. They could shade out those plants that you are wanting to grow. And then of course that weed seed bank, you can't forget about that because in some plants it could be hundreds of thousands of weed seeds. And Also, most seed is located in the top inch of soil, and it's gonna live for years. That's the other thing. It's gonna be there a long time. So, this is the old adage, 1 year's weed is equal to 7 years seed. So that's how long they're going to, they can be around for a very long time. And they actually last more than 7 years in some cases. And like I said, they're really prolific, thousands of seeds per plant. And if you look at the mullein that's highlighted on there, the number of seeds produced per plant, 223,200. That's a lot. And it's not, to combat that, it might be really difficult. And it's 39 years is the survival.
So it's gonna basically outlive you.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. That's why I got so quiet. I was like, wow. Wow, I'm not even going to stand a chance on that one.
Yeah.
And it's so funny, too, because last year particularly, like, with the mullein, I was like, no, this is a good plant, and it can have its place on my property. And then when I'm reading these statistics, what did I do? You know, I didn't do anything. I just let it be because I thought it would be great to have it. Now I'm changing my mind. But this next slide, the weed seed bank, you want to know, why do I have all these weeds I just have a mat of weeds in my garden. And the weed seeds that fall onto the soil add to the soil seed bank. So in this diagram, it shows two major sources of seed from weeds that are located in the soil to the seed that's brought in. And it's brought in through, several different mechanisms. It could be wind, it could be animals, it could be equipment, things like that. So once they drop on the soil, a number of things can reduce their numbers, like seed predation from insects and animals up in the top there. And that can reduce the numbers, but that's only when it's on the surface of the soil. Now, any seed that gets enough moisture and starts to germinate, it could fail due to pathogens, hopefully, fingers crossed, but not necessarily. And then if it gets buried too deep in the soil, then the environment, is not right, the temperature and the moisture, so that's one way. And then also the seedlings can succumb to physical damage by tillage tools. That's one way that we can hope that we can combat them a little bit. And it could be also due to physiological flaw. There might be something wrong with that seed. But as you can see on the diagram, there are different things that can stop it. When you think back to that previous slide with the 223,000 seeds, it's kind of a lot. Okay. So these are the weed categories. And weeds are like any plant, and they can be categorized into annual, biennial, fixed perennial, and wandering perennials. Now, different categories of weeds reproduce differently and affect where they will become established and what strategies are possible to work in managing and controlling them. So we see lamb's quarter and barnyard grass, and those are examples of the annuals in this first column here. Do I need to flip my slide? Nope. Okay. I didn't know if there was a thing on it. And then, what is another?
Galanzogas.
Yep, that's a Galanzoga. And also, Queen Anne's lace is going to be an example of a biennial. Dandelion that we were talking about before will be an example of a fixed perennial, and quackgrass is an example of a wandering perennial. So down here are the examples, and then up at the top here is their type. Does anybody have any questions so far? Have been any clear? I see you're all thinking, you're anticipating I'm going to battle these first things as early as I can this spring. So some of the steps
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have any handout that shows the weed and then identifies it so I can, a show and tell?
A show and tell.
You know, it's something I can take home.
Well, get some books that you might borrow from the library, like Thompson.
Okay, no, I'm
So we have some other computer types of things that you can.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So, number one is to identify the weed. That's going to give you the information on how to control it. If you don't know what it is, you don't know what steps to take. You need to know, once you know what it is and its habit of growth, which is key, then you can ask questions like, does it reroot from root sections? You know, does it have rhizomes or stolons? Is it a grass, a sedge, or a broadleaf weed? All those things are going to help you determine your control method and your timing. And timing is going to be super important. I think that's one of the most important things, really. Because if you know, the simplest way to look at it, I think, is if you miss the timing and that gallon soda is already gone to seed and already deposited all those seeds into the ground, then you know you're already a step behind there. So knowing the weed is super important. And also another piece is reestablishing the desired plant after you use your control methods, because you've got to replace it and get what you want established, or else you're going to be facing the same weed control battle again. So we did bring some of these examples, and you can see if the library has them as well. But Newcomb's Guide to Wildflowers, because going back again to in the beginning when I said a weed is, you know, a plant that's growing where you might not necessarily want it. All these beautiful wildflowers that we talk about, they're beautiful when we're going by them on the highway or something, but when they start showing up in our vegetable gardens, all of a sudden they're no longer this beautiful wildflower. Now they're a weed to us. Weeds of the Northeast is another great resource. That's one that I really like. And then the Field Guide to Wildflowers. Because again, when it's lovely and we're seeing it in a photo, it's a wildflower meadow. When they're in our vegetable gardens, they're weeds. They're also for identification, like you were asking about. There is an app that you can put on your phone, but they aren't all the same. They aren't all the same caliber. The best app only has a 67% accuracy rate, but I find it helpful in that it can lead you down the right path, or it can lead you down the wrong path, but you know it. So if you complement the app with a reputable source, and there are others online as well, like Donna had mentioned, but it helps you also search by the scientific name, genus and species, because common names can differ, you know, they can be different depending on where you're from, you know. The common names can be pretty varied, actually. But all of these things combined, like you could get an idea from the app, then you could follow it up with a written publication, or you could also follow up with more information online. So they did do a survey. Michigan State University did a study on the Plant ID apps, and Picture This was one of the best. That was about 60% accurate, so that's really good. And then you can see they go down a bit. PlantNet is next. Plant Story after that. Leaf Snap, iNaturalist, Seek, and Plant Snap, and then Garden Answers. So I think mostly with the apps, I just ask other folks I know that use them a lot and see how they like them. Yeah.
I actually have the Picture This app for my house plants because it helps diagnose problems with them and keeps on a watering cycle. So it's really nice for a garden as well because it will tell you why your plant is dying or like what kind of bugs are on it and how you can help it. So I've used that for a couple of years now. I've never used it to identify weeds, but I have for
A lot of,
diagnosing
some of these
plant
apps have
issues.
multiple functions.
Yeah.
So that's, another
So I
function.
really like the picture of this one. That's
Yeah.
very nice.
That's good to know, because it's helpful if you can go by other people's, feedback and whatnot. And there are others that, not only identify plants, but do birds and, insects and things like that. So you can get some that are doing double duty for sure, but it's good to have the feedback. So it's picture this. That's one that you've had good success with. Yeah.
Those apps, is that where you take a picture of something, you're supposed to send it to a site and they identify it? Or is something where you just call up a picture and say, oh, that's what I'm holding in my hand, or that's, what are we talking about by
picture
apps?
this.
Take a picture of what you're looking
Yeah,
at.
the picture of this, you open the app.
Okay.
It's a program on your smartphone. And it
Okay.
says you can either, just shine it on your sample, or you can take a picture of the sample
Oh,
on your phone and then just tell the app, well, look at that picture that I just took. And it will say, this is what I think it is.
oh no, look, no wonder it, okay, 67% wouldn't be bad for that kind of snap and tell me. Okay.
When these first started, you
Email
had
notes,
to
right?
actually email to somebody, you had to send it to somebody, and then an expert would come back to you, so it was like a long lag time. This is like, check out that picture, what is it? And a lot of them will give you some ideas, different ideas.
Yeah,
And they'll say,
yeah,
yeah,
the smartphone.
Yeah, it's nice because if they can't identify it dead on, they will give you a list of like 10 or 12 sometimes different options of what it could be. So then you can go look more into it and figure out exactly what it is.
And if you have multiple apps, well, I've got several apps on my phone. So it's like if one you're not satisfied with, you can try another. Or you can go to get some other places to go to.
So, picture this and leaf snap were the two that we were just talking about. And
Did you want to see this?
like Donna was saying, if one doesn't work for you, you can try, another one. But this, I think at first a lot of them were trying to get as much data in as they could. So like they wanted to download your picture that you just took, and they'd want to know your location. And so that's just something to be aware of, because they're trying to, map out where people are sending you what. So the online educational resources, there are a lot of them, and if you give us your email, we're going to send these links to you as well. But the USDA Plants Database, Go Botany, that's the one I have the best luck with, but that doesn't, that's just the one I like the most. I find it easy to use. I also like Missouri Weed ID. And then, of course, there's Weeds of the Northeast, the Rutgers Weed Gallery, and UMass Weed Herbarium.
Herbarium.
I can't do it, even when I want to. Herbarium. Yeah. But these are all great resources. And really, if you're thinking about, between the printed material, the online resources, and the app, you should be able to narrow it down. But if you're still having some problems, you can also, IDing, you can still reach out to your local extension office. I got ahead of myself, not that slide yet. But also invasive plants. Maine.gov is a great place to identify the invasives. The invasives, I think, we have to be a little more diligent on IDing them and then removing them, because it's not just a matter of like, oh, we have places where we need to do in the garden. This is when they're spreading and they're causing not only economic harm, but harm to the environment as well. That's just my little plug on that. But if you're still having trouble IDing the plant, you can reach out to University of Maine Extension, Plant ID, and there's a link that will provide you in our follow-up email. But it's going to be information like your name, your email, of course, the county, the question, the town where the plant is found, And what site type, like, did you find it in the woods, did you find it in your garden, a meadow, something like that, a pasture? And we need information like, the growing conditions, how tall it was, the type of plant, whether it was a tree, a shrub, a vine, things like that. Any distinctive traits, like, you know, did it have a really strong odor, or, you know, just something that you don't normally take note of. And, of course, photos. We need photos to help with that. And this is the one that I was talking about, the Native Plant Trust and Go Botany. One of the reasons I like this so much is because you can go to the simple key, and if you're not used to using online resources to ID plants, you can go and it has a step-by-step thing to walk you through so that you can answer certain questions, and then it says, oh, check this. So it's really, really helpful. So is it poisonous? The dose makes the poison. But if you have concerns, this is a resource for you. And this is for human contact. It's the Northern New England Poison Control Center, and it has that number 1-800-222-1222. If it's poisonous to livestock and pets in North Carolina, it's North Carolina State University, and then Cornell has plants poisonous to livestock. Now these are some, I was gonna trade off here, but I don't know if it's a good.
Doesn't matter.
Okay, so these are some more of the common weeds that we see, and I'm going to just put through these. This is a winter annual, and this is shepherd's purse.
I'd like to point out that you see the little seed pods? They look like a little purse. So years ago when I learned to identify this plant, somebody said, see, it looks like a little purse. So that's how I've always remembered shepherd's purse.
Now I'm always going to remember it. I'm gonna flip one more time so that it puts the information up there. So these seeds need a cold treatment. They will persist in the soil, and only seeds near the soil surface are going to germinate. So earlier we talked about if they're too deep. This is an instance where if those are too deep, they're not going to germinate. Luckily, the seedlings are fragile, and it's critical to remove the mature plants before they shed the seeds. Your best line of defense. So next is barnyard grass. I'm sure you all have seen this one. This is like, I always think of it growing up between the cracks and sidewalks and.
If you have a friend who has some livestock and they have a manure pile, you'll see a lot of this.
Yeah.
And say, oh yeah, you can
You
take
can
the
take-
manure.
That's a really good point, Donna. You ought to
Because
talk about that.
Well, you talked about how do weed seeds get on a place, transport, and it's like,
Yeah.
it does have some value. The manure has some value.
But sometimes they're sharing more than you think. But you're going to be so good at weed control that you're going to be out there beforehand and you'll have a handle on it all. So
Oh, sure.
it'll be great. But these seeds need warmth and light to germinate. They mostly germinate in the top 1 inch of the soil, and soil compaction increases seedling emergence from deep in the soil, and it is intolerant of shade. So,
So remember that. It's important to remember.
I mean, that
Keep your manure pile in the shade.
In the garden, we have some things that we can do to prevent the sun from starting to soil.
So here is our lovely Galanzoga again. And luckily the seed's only viable on this summer annual for 1 to 2 years. The seeds germinate near the surface of the soil, It does need light and warmth to germinate. It's sensitive to drought. And plants mature pretty rapidly. This is one of the first ones we talked about, how rapidly it does mature. And the problem is with this one, it can produce 2 to 3 generations in one summer. So it's an ongoing battle, for sure. So the common ragweed, again, it's a summer annual. Seeds are highly persistent in the soil, and the large plants produce the most seeds, and the seeds emerge from 1 top inch of the soil. But luckily, the seedlings are fragile, but it does develop a taproot, and the seeds will survive in the digestive tract of livestock. So, you know, it's got a good means of distribution right there.
And I was going to say with that, we used to have a lot of strawberries, and you go out, and if you pulled the weed and just let it lay there, because it has that long taproot, it will revegetate, and it's like, ha ha ha. So be careful when you're pulling weeds, pull them and remove them.
Kind of like a Terminator type of ragweed. So the purslane, see, this is shade tolerant, but the seedlings are fragile, so that's good. But the seeds persist a really long time in the soil, and they emerge best at the surface of the soil. And the rough pigweed, was it you earlier that guessed if something was pigweed or not? Yeah. Do you have this one?
I had them for a long time because I had hay from bunnies, and I get them about so big in two rows out in my farm. I pull them up, dump them, and then this year, because I didn't get a chance to do any farming, I had one that went up almost 5 feet and bloomed.
Oh,
So it's
dear, 5 feet.
I'll wind up smothering it anyway. I'm redoing the whole farm,
Oh,
basically with stall mats.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Good barrier right there.
Yeah.
Well, this is also a summer annual, and the seeds emerge from the top 1.5 inch of soil. The seedlings can't emerge through mulch over 2 inches deep, so you're going to be in good shape because you're going to have
My problem isn't so much this kind of stuff. My place is infested with wild berry bushes. And as fast as I cut them back, this year what I had to do is really get down below the soil level so I don't trip over what's left. It's just taken over. A friend of mine's got a greenhouse up in Lee, and she said it's got under the wall into the greenhouse. That's why I'm putting in the stall mats with big tanks. And newspaper in between all the seams.
Wow, that's a battle, but that's like some good strategy right there for sure.
It's going to be an expensive one, but
Yeah.
it'll work.
Yeah. So on the pigweed, though, it is highly responsive to nitrogen fertilizer. So keep that in mind. And
Responsive as in it will love to grow in that.
it's going to be happy and it's going to say thank you.
Yes.
God had that 5-foot plant. It's like plenty of fertilizer, so it's being grown.
Yeah.
And I didn't even feed anything last year.
Well, it was probably leftover nitrogen.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was thinking was like, was that maybe like, when we think about, I'm thinking about all the different like lawn fertilizers and things and the runoff from them. You know, when you probably think, oh, pick me too. You know, thanks for the boost.
Can you go back one to show the seed of this? Okay, yep. Okay.
Let me see if I have anything better. Is that a little clear?
Okay.
The lamb's quarter, is that the one that's, the leaves are a little fuzzy? Yeah, okay, that's what I thought it looked like. Thanks.
I shouldn't admit this because we're recording, but I actually love the color of it. I think it's just the prettiest color ever. It's like, too bad we couldn't take that and make it into a nice plant, you know. And it would look great in window boxes at the beginning, you know. So lamb's quarter, the seeds emerge from the top inch of soil. Seedlings cannot emerge through mulch over 2 inches deep. Oh, I already did this. I'm so sorry. I need to go ahead here. Okay. All right, Donna, I think this is where,
You want me to take over?
well, I don't recognize this slide.
This just shows the life cycle of when you can control annual weeds. And the different opportunities that you have.
It's a great slide. I love it. I didn't know it was in here. But, yeah.
Okay, so remember all the things that Lori was talking about with all those different annuals. During seed dormancy, the seeds themselves, they may have fatal germination. You know, may try to start, you know, can't do it. Something might eat it. It might just not be genetically right, so it's not going to survive. So those are some ways that it can be controlled in the seed stage. In seedling stage, cultivation, flame weeding. Anybody heard of flame weeding before? Got a slide later on. Seedling predation. Sometimes there are animals that will get out and eat the seedlings. Usually they eat the desirable
They're eating your
seeds.
plants. I mean, they're in for everything if they're eating weeds.
And actually, some of our annual weeds can succumb to disease. We usually don't notice it. And they can succumb to competition from other plants too. Once they get into these small plants, we need to, you can rely on cultivation, mowing, and if they're great, big, huge 5-foot plants, going out and taking out individual plants, removing them from the area. If you put them on your compost pile and you don't turn it regularly and it doesn't get heated up to 140 degrees, the seeds are going to survive. You may want to consider taking them to the local landfill. Okay, so moving on, this is Queen Anne's lace. Usually we see these in fields and meadows. In a home garden, we generally don't see that because it's a biennial and we usually till the garden. So you're disrupting the life cycle. But the seeds can germinate throughout the season, and the first year they just have a rosette at ground level. They get very ferny types of leaves. They kind of look pretty. In the second season, they send out that flowering stalk because the type of flower that a lot of insects like to land on to get pollen or nectar. Rosette stage, the first year it's the easiest control of that. You can cut back the flowering stalk, but when you see the flowers, they've closed up and they're brown and everything, the seeds are you missed.
John, I have a question about Queen Anne's lace. Is that also called wild carrot?
Yes.
Is the
It's
root
in the
edible?
carrot family. I'm not sure. If it is, it's not going to be tasty like a carrot.
Okay.
So, but I was going to say that I have a very unique seed catalog that I get.
Yeah.
And they do sell Queen Anne's lace seed. And they consider it, valuable for the taproot.
Yeah.
And in a culinary way. I don't know, I've never cooked it, I don't know that, but yeah, that's another, it's so funny to me, like, these are our weeds, but I actually now see dandelion, I see goldenrod, and I see Queen Anne's lace in certain seed catalogs.
Thank you.
And some
They're
of our
selling dandelions.
Yeah, I was like,
Come to my lawn.
right? I had a hoot and a half over that one. Yeah, it was awesome.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
The catalog selling purslane too.
Yes, and that was actually as a pot,
Yeah.
potted plant that I could have bought that, and that was somewhat locally. It's like, wow, I'm missing
I'm
out.
out
I
there
could be making a
ripping it up.
fortune.
So we were moving on to
Yeah.
and so this is a perennial, and it also spreads by seeds. and
Making wishes.
You know, the little fluff ball, we love, you know, blowing on it, having the seeds go all over the place. And in the springtime, you have a wind sometimes when the dandelions are in seed, the fluff goes all over. And those seeds, if you have desirable plants growing, they somehow get caught right in the base of the soil.
You're right.
Yeah, and this is probably with our strawberries, it's right next to the strawberry plants, so they were very hard to grow. And they're just germinating on the top edge of the soil, but they do, so they're perennial, stay there. They do have a high requirement for potash. And you'd think, well, okay, then I'll just have deficient soil. Well, if you have deficient, if your soil is deficient in potash, then many plants are gonna grow well. Seedlings, if you have small seedlings, they can be controlled by straw mulch, the glare straw mulch. But it doesn't take long. Once they get the sun, it's very happy. If you start tilling up an area and you break those little roots, it's like starting one plant with 10 plants, so the little root sections. Okay, moving on to Canada thistle.
Yep.
If you've got, again, this is, we see in fields or areas that aren't tilled as much. It has a deep root system. The shoots can come right up through straw mulch. So if you have a perennial bed, you might start seeing this. When you go to pull it out, it has prickers on the leaves, so it's very hard. You have to have thick leather-type gloves to try to get a hold of it. The seeds, though, are not very long-lived. So some of these, it's like if you can get them under control, then you can move on to other problems.
I know that I bought some hay from a neighbor when we had to establish a little lawn or, you know, just to mulch here and there with, and I got the thistle from his hay. I did not anticipate that. The only places I got the thistle was where I put down hay. So I said, oh, I know where this came from. So I was pulling for years. Every plant I could see, I just pulled right to the root. They're pretty much gone, you know.
That's good.
One or two.
It takes a while.
It takes a little while.
Some of these weeds, it can take a while. Now this weed, this is what we call quack grass. But folks from other areas may call it different names. Or their version of quack grass is some other plant. But for Maine, this is what we're making quack grass. If you look at the underground roots, they have these really sharp root points that can actually spear a potato. And I've had people bring in, throw in like a potato. That's a quack grass root.
I just call it evil.
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 Yeah.
But I have actually bulbs that the quackgrass hears.
Really?
Yeah, it's like, I had it pinned to my bulletin board in the office for quite a while, but it got discouraging, but yeah, they just
They're
peer
very
straight
good.
through my tulip bulbs and.
I think I've also heard it called witchgrass.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Although witchgrass, I've seen another
Another thing.
plant.
All right.
So it's like, you want to double check and make sure you're both talking about the same plant.
Right.
But if it's a perennial, it has these underground sharp-ended roots, it's probably our quackgrass.
How is it different from the barnyard grass?
Barnyard grass is an annual, remember? And
Okay.
barnyard grass roots are, they don't wander.
Oh, they don't.
It's just a bunch
Okay.
of grass.
Yep. Thanks.
If you pull that up, you just get a fringe of roots. You wouldn't get any little so the rhizomes are susceptible to drying, but remember they're down in the soil a few inches. So it's like if I know some people that they try to rip them up and they lay them on the surface of the soil when it's really hot and it dries that segment out. So it's true, it can dry them out. But if there are other little segments that are still on the ground, you know, they may still germinate. Deep plowing, that means actually getting a plow that inverts the soil, like 6 inches. So you're burying it. It can reduce the emergence. But you can, through repeated plowing or repeated tilling, you can reduce the root reserves. I've got a little slide here that has a lot of things happening. So with tillage, we break up all the roots into the little plants that could reroot. But that chart up at the top is showing you that if you continuously till during the summer, eventually those little plants can't recover. They don't have enough energy stores. So you don't let, you let the plant come up a little bit, see a little bit of green, till it. Let it come up a little bit, see a little bit of green, till it. Do it all summer long. You can't just do it for 4 weeks. This is a progress. And you see at the end there in November, finally, because the roots don't have enough energy, you can get more.
Anna, if you, for this, if you keep repeatedly tilling, aren't you destroying your soil though at the same time?
But you're not going to be planting anything that year. That year is your control year.
Oh, I see.
And in Maine, we're lucky. When we mess up our garden soils, we go through the freeze-thaw situation in springtime, and that will bring the soil back to our house. So we're lucky. Where in places that don't have frozen soil, they can be stuck with it. So that might be true. But in this case, you've got a bad weed problem, and you want to get a hold of it. It's true, we tell you don't till, continuous till. But you're not going down 6 inches. This tillage is just that first few inches of soil. So you're not going to be turning over the soil 6 inches, because then you just get new roots. So it's that shallow tillage, continuous during the summer, every few weeks. Okay, so take a short poll here and find out. So you folks have seen some weeds, and so Dottie's using mats to try to get the weeds under control. What other types of things have folks done?
Pulling.
Pulling.
Yeah, a lot of hand pulling. And I drape a lot of my vegetable gardens either with a cloth or occasionally plastic. I block sun.
So block it out.
Yeah, block them out.
Yeah.
Tilling mulch.
Tilling mulch.
Anyone have any cool garden tools, mechanical means? Like, I've seen some pretty cool. You use a claw.
I use everything.
Yeah.
Everything but, I don't use any chemicals, as it's called.
Yeah.
I have too much wildlife and I don't want to hurt them.
And what's it called?
Is it larger?
Dutch
So it's
hoe.
larger
Dutch-
than just
Dutch
a
hoe?
regular triangular hoe? It's larger than the typical.
You can use sizes. It's just very big.
Well, I've got a website that I'll show you that
Using it.
the students at the University of Maine went through all the hand tools, and they had a bunch of weeds. They had, row crop, and so they showed you how that hand tool worked.
Oh.
And so there's a place that you can go to see the different implements that they investigated. So our next segment, we're going to talk about weed control methods, cultural methods, mulching methods, and then we will talk about herbicides, biological and chemical controls. So these are the types of things we're going to launch into. So types of garden, if you have the conventional row type garden, and this is what we see farmers are using, row type. It's easy to organize, quick and efficient to get for large plantings. But every time you have a lot of bare space, that means you're gonna have more weeds. And you'll have less yield per area because you have more bare space. So another type is raised bed or wide row. And we always get people, they want to put boards or some barrier around the raised bed. Well, you don't need a barrier, you just can put the soil. And it has a lot of benefits. It will warm first in the springtime so you can plant earlier. It will drain better, so if we have a lot of rain, that's good. It's bad because if it's dry, it will require more moisture. And once you get your raised bed formed, then if you don't walk in the raised bed, then that will prevent it from getting compacted, the soil from getting compacted. It's easier to weed pressure. Yeah. And there's less open area for the weeds to grow. And the middle picture shows a raised bed, and it's actually V-shaped, so that people that have disabilities, if they're in a wheelchair or something, they can get their knees under it.
Oh, nice.
Plus, it doesn't take as much soil. And when we have raised beds, we can plant our vegetables or our plants closer together, so we're shading the soil, so there's not as much bare soil, so there's not as much opportunity for the weeds to get going. But at the same time, when we crowd plants together, that we may be increasing our chance for disease because the leaves aren't drying out as well. So it's like there's never one thing that's going to work. It's like if you do this, you might have more disease. So you have to keep a look on everything. And if you do start to see disease happening, you take out some of the plants. And if it's lettuce, just eat them. Container gardening is a super small space. And every year we do a one tomato project, and this is in 1 year. Lori's going to take that over from now on. The thing with growing in containers, you will get an occasional weed, but it's like just an occasional weed. Easy to control. If your plants are in containers, they're going to need a lot more fertilizer and a lot more water, so you have to be careful of that. And if you have it on rollers, you can roll them around. You know, if it's getting too cold, you can roll them in, pull them out, back out. So as far as cultural control, sanitation, and that means don't bring the weeds onto your garden. And if you have weeds that you're picking or pulling out and they have seeds in them, don't put them in your plants. Rotating your plants, and we'll talk a little bit about cover crops to try to break a weed cycle can help. Compatible crops, and we talked about, some plants might be weeds if they're grown in with other plants, but sometimes people plant different vegetables together, trying to take advantage of some symbiosis. And part of this is keeping the soil surface covered so that weed seeds aren't going to germinate. Because with onions, they're growing more upright, and your beets, the leaves will cover more and will shade the soil a little bit. Carrots are really slow to grow. Peas come up real fast. So these are types of plants that the idea is you're still trying to shade the soil, prevent getting the weed seeds and chance to germinate. Watering. Our vegetables need at least an inch of water a week, and some vegetables need 2 inches of water a week. And we have a lot of people that say, well, I'll just lug the water out to the garden. A 10 by 10 space needs 60 gallons of water a week to get that 1 inch. During the summer, when we don't have any rain, you're lugging 60 gallons of water. we use a rain gauge to keep track of it, what you garden. And it's just, we have been having longer sessions of drought during the summer, so it's usually you'll need to do something. If you're watering, try to do trickle irrigation or a watering method that doesn't get the leaves wet, because if you get the leaves wet, they're more susceptible to disease. If you water in the morning, so if the leaves do get wet in it's morning, then you get the whole day. And if you do trickle irrigation, you can just put the irrigation tubes down where your vegetables are, not in the alleyways, so you're starving the weeds for moisture. If you're not getting that same moisture, they'll have a tougher time. Plus you're conserving water. I mentioned flaming. You can do this, but it only works when the seedlings are a couple of inches. If they're 4 inches, too late. And I had someone say, well, this has been years ago, before the internet, and I forgot where I heard this, but someone had a strawberry patch, and they had put down straw mulch, and they saw some weeds poking up, and they'd heard that flaming will take care of the weeds. They flamed the weed in the straw and caught on fire, burned the whole patch, burned the strawberry patch. So it's like, be careful, because that's a flame you got there.
It is super fun though, very satisfying.
And if you have black plastic mulch or any plastic mulch you get near, although some people use a butane torch to make the holes.
Yeah, I have the things you
But don't hold it too long or too close. Cultivation and pulling. Using a hoe. There's manual cultivators, there's power rotary cultivators. When you're cultivating and you have your desirable plant, you don't want to go down very deep. Just top into soil. If you go down, like the picture on the right there, you go down 4 or 5 inches, you're cutting your crop's roots. You don't want to do that. And you're bringing up more weed seeds that they were in dormancy. Down 3 inches down, so you're bringing up more weed seeds. Don't bring them up. And University of Maine just got this new slick thing, and from the inventor of Roomba. And it's called a turtle, and it kind of looks like a turtle. It's solar based, so you set it out in your garden, and you have to put like boundaries. I don't have a Roomba. Oh, yeah. I've heard you make boundaries to it too.
yes.
And it just continuously goes. It has a little whirly thing, and it whirls up the seedlings. You have to wait until your crop is up big enough that it's not going to be whacked.
Yeah.
So is it cutting it off, or is it kind of pulling it, or and
Well,
then
it's
where
got a
does it
little,
go?
it's got a little wheelie thing.
Okay.
It reminds me of a weed whacker. It's a new
Okay.
weed whacker. That's what it reminded me of. And so they're staying right there, so it's controlling the vegetative seed. And the chart is showing you what they did. They plotted an area, and so the longer they had them out there, by the 5th day, they had control of the weed seeds. And the blue line is the control. So
Without the Roomba.
without the turtle.
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 How do you get to a Roomba though?
Garden Roomba.
Yeah,
It's
the
gonna
garden
be a garden Roomba. And then a few years ago, I saw this battery-powered scuffle hoe, and it's like, yes, we've seen weed whackers. Well, this is a and it's, if you, we'll send you that website, but they have music to the background. It's a big deal, and this was done in Europe, and they just had a great deal of fun with this. Too much fun. And I mentioned University of Maine has the manual hose, and if you go to the zero seed rain at UMaine, you'll see all of these video clips, and they're only less than a minute. I think most of them are less than a minute. And it just shows you how that particular hoe worked for them, or how it works to pull up the beans. And it's kind of neat. Excuse me. Okay. Many years ago, I had a colleague, Rosenberg, who he coined this term, recreational rototill. And once I say the name, I think you know what I mean. You get one of these new walk-behind rototillers, and they prepare the soil so nice. And they're so easy to use. And you can make them go really deep. But then people start using them all summer long. That's when you get the ruining the soil makeup. So it's like, if you need to do that deep till, do it once in the spring. If you need to use the rototiller, just go down an inch, no further than that, and then you'll be okay. But I get it, it does such a nice job. It smells so nice getting that soil out, and it looks so pretty.
It looks pretty.
It looks pretty, and then you have a rain and it crusts over, and you say, well, what's wrong with it? Okay, so cover crops. Remember we mentioned rotating? If you have enough space and you can set aside a portion of your garden space to grow cover crops, then you till the cover crops in, and that can add organic matter, can add nutrients, can break the cycle of many of your weeds. So we're going to go through a few of the options that we have for cover crops. The winter cover crops just mean that they grow during the summer and they hold the soil in place during the winter. And some of them die back and some of them don't. But it will prevent any erosion. Pretty soon our snow is going to melt, and if your garden is on a hill, then the soil may just run off. And so winter cover crop will hold the soil. But you want the cover crop, a type of cover crop that you can easily incorporate in the soil. We've got some that can get a little rank, and you want it to compete with your weeds. We have summer green manures, and those are crops that we grow earlier in the season, and we till in to increase the nutrients, and again, get some of the weeds under control. So in the springtime, you may have an area that you're not going to plant immediately. You could put summer green manure crop in. They're generally crops that grow best in warm weather, and they tend to smother weeds. And then there's the living mulch that we leave growing all the time, and this would be in a perennials planting. This actually was in a vineyard, and it's a perennial grass that is not a creeping grass. It just stays right in place, and so it's suppressing the weeds, because again, where the grass is not bare soil. Under where the grapevines are, of course, that is bare, so the farmer has to take care of that. So the first cover crop that we'll talk about is oats, and oats are pretty easily available. And these are whole oats. If you go to the local hardware stores, a lot of times they'll have them in bulk. You just scoop out some. If you have a farmer friend, or you go to somebody that's feeding oats to animals, you can take a little bag of them and use that. Seeding rate is 2.5 pounds per 1,000 square foot of garden space. And you can seed these from mid-August to early September. You can seed them earlier But then you wanna make sure you till them in so you don't have oats as weed, because they will get a seed. And they are easy to till in because they die back in the winter. And one little thing about the oat seed, no, it's not true of the other types of cover crops. But once you have your soil prepared and you throw the seed out, the oat seed will find its way down in the soil. Where other plants you have to make sure that you covered them with a little bit and firm the soil. Firming the soil helps with anything. Rye, seeding rate 2.5 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Same type of seeding date, but rye will overwinter. This is rye for grain. There's rye grass that we grow for lawns, and rye for grain. I'm talking about rye for grain. And it does have this capability, it's called an allelopathic effect, that once you till it in the soil or once it's growing, it sends out a chemical that inhibits seeds from germinating. So it's like, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to be planting that seed. Might not be a good choice, but if I'm going to be planting a plant, it doesn't matter. Because it's preventing the germination from seeds, but it only lasts for a few weeks. It doesn't last very long. And the other thing is the rye can get 5 or 6 feet tall. And so for a home gardener, 5 or 6 foot tall, like a plant, to try to till that in, even if you have a tiller, it's going to be hard to get it incorporated. If you go in and keep it mowed so it's lower, that might be easier, or even in the springtime, as soon as you can get out there. Get on and mow it first, and then till it in. Might be an option. Clover is a legume that will pull in nitrogen, but the thing is, it has to have has to be inoculated with a certain bacteria so that nitrogen fixation will happen. So whenever you get this clover seed, you want to see if it has been inoculated. If it hasn't, usually where you buy the seed, they'll have little packets of it. And you only need 3/10 of a pound per 1,000 square feet, because the seed is tiny. It's tiny. And it will be slow to get established. So it's the growth will be better in the second year usually. But again, it's hard to get it to grow, and then it may be hard to get incorporated into the soil if you let it get too big. Buckwheat is a green manure that a lot of gardeners use. And if you go to the garden centers, they usually sell it in little packets for you. A pound per 1,000 square feet. You can plant it anytime that it's warm out. It won't survive the winter. But if you plant it early and don't take care of it, it will go to seed and buckwheat. It's more of a succulent, so it has a lot of juicy stuff in it. So it will till in easy. It's very easy to incorporate.
Pollinators love it.
Pollinators love it. You can make successive plantings if you have trouble with some weeds. Buckwheat is a way to keep the ground covered and shaded. It doesn't provide a lot of organic matter because of this moisture. Okay. So we talked about all the different types of seed. How do you plant them? You can just broadcast them. Years ago, they used to talk about it. It's like you're feeding the chickens. So broadcast it. You can get special seeders that plant it out at a certain rate. You can just plant it in between rows. It's better. Most of the seeds, if you rake them just barely, 1/4 inch, so you're just dragging the rake through the soil. If you firm the soil seed bed, your chances of success is increased. Don't put any fertilizer on, because that's what the cover crops was doing. And here's just showing you, just sprinkling it out. And this is what the little baby seedlings look like. And the other picture is buckwheat in with some lettuce. On to mulching. And mulching provides several benefits. It reduces the soil evaporation, so this may be a tool that you can use to help during the summertime when we don't have as much rain. Cover the soil so you don't have the moisture that's there evaporate. Reduces the weed growth because you don't have, the sun isn't striking the soil surface. It can insulate the soil from temperature extremes. And it's like, well, if we get in the springtime, we get some cooler weather, it will hold the heat in the soil. In the fall, it will hold the heat in the soil. You'll get a few degrees benefit. It prevents soil from splashing on the plants, and that's another method, or that's another way that disease can get into the plant, is when the soil splashes on the leaves, and mulching is going to help prevent that. Prevents the soil crusting and erosion. Remember I mentioned if you tilled it too much, it rained, you get crusting development. Well, when you have a mulch, you don't want to do it about the crusting. And crusting isn't good because once the soil crusts, then we have another rain and it washes off. And if you have organic mulches, they can provide some slow release of nutrients, but if they're providing slow release of nutrients, the soil bacteria are pulling nitrogen out of the soil. So you have to watch the plants. If they look a little anemic, you have to provide some source of.
Could you say that again? I didn't quite catch. Organic releases nutrients, but pulls.
It will eventually release nutrients.
Right.
But to do that, the carbon in the organic matter has to be broken down. And to have it broken down, the soil bacteria needs nitrogen.
I gotcha.
And it will pull the nitrogen out of the soil. So it removes it temporarily. And then eventually put it back in. So that's why, you're out in the garden, if you notice, your plants are looking a little yellowy. They may need to come into this. And some of the organic mulch materials, of course, if you do compost, that has the organic material broken down, so you don't have to worry so much about that. Newspapers, some of the carpets, there are some man-made, some not man-made, some natural type carpets that you can use, leaves, bark mulch, wood chips, grass clippings, and you have to be careful. Make sure you don't have grass clippings from an area that has used herbicides, because there are some herbicides that may carry over. And also sometimes grass clippings, people wait until the grass seeds out, and so you may be putting grass seed. It will be attractive to some garden pests, and we will get questions about slugs in the garden. And it's like after you've spent your time mulching the plants, to get it so you're suppressing the weeds, you're holding in the moisture, then the slugs come in, and we're going to tell you get rid of the mulch. So it depends what your problem is, how you're going to attack it. And I mentioned the under-decomposed mulch will pull nitrogen out. And sour mulch, we don't see this as much now. But when I first started working, you'd have sawmills that had these sawdust piles that were like 2 stories high. And they'd go in, and eventually they'd want to get it spread out, so they'd give it away. And some of that mulch, if it's deep in the pile, it actually ferments. And so it's acidic. And if you smelled it, it would smell kind of sour. And many years ago, I used to have people come in, and that's what had happened. They'd use mulch that was from deep enough high. On the surface, if it's been aerobically working, it's fine. But if it's inside the pipe, it's anaerobic, where there's no air, and that's where you get that acid. And the way you tell, you can smell it. You can tell. And for organic mulches, you put it in the springtime, down in the springtime, after the soil warms up. If you put it out early, it holds the cold in the soil. So it's like the first time, and yes, you're going to have, if you have perennials, you're going to have mulch for the perennials in the springtime, that's fine. But it's just, first time out, wait until the soil warms up. Wood chips and bark, 1 to 2 inches deep. Dried grass,
It's hard to say.
grass clippings. You only need about 1 inch because they pack down pretty well. And you don't want to have them in contact with your desirable plants because again, it may be holding in moisture next to the stem of the plant and cause some diseases. And again, don't use mulch from an area treated with herbicides. Recycled materials, newspapers, carpets, linoleums, and sometimes we have people want to get rid of bamboo, and one of the ways Lois Sackler, our past horticulturist, had suggested is to use big pieces of linoleum because that will exclude the light, and it's a little tougher. And to try to get the area under control, so you're excluding the light. Plastics, there are different types of plastics. And you probably notice that. There's the clear plastics, in the winter we've got, a lot of people have plastics on the windows. There's IRT, which may be a new term. It's infrared transmitting. That means it lets the heat in, but excludes the light. And then the black plastic. It's excluding the light, but doesn't let the heat in. So the clear plastic lets the heat and the light in. IRT lets the heat in, but not the light. And the black plastic doesn't let it in. And they've done a lot of research with colors and everything, and sometimes a different color will have insect control properties.
Do you have a preference, or what would you, I bet you're going to go right into that, aren't you?
Well, tarping is another term.
Okay.
And the question is, if you need to gather heat, you're trying to gather heat, then clear plastic is the key. And sometimes we need to, we want to suppress the weeds, so we may use a black plastic mulch on the ground level where the plants are, and we may cover it with clear plastic to hold the heat in. Again, the university's done a lot of work on tarping. For a while, we recommended solarization, and that's laying a clear plastic sheet over a garden spot, sealing the edges. This is during the summer, so it will heat up really well and kill the weed seeds, kill the weeds that are in that space. But it depends on the weather. If you don't have that hot weather, it's not going to work. So then they started doing tarping with black mulch, and this is called oxalation. And remember I said it doesn't let the sunlight in, so it's preventing photosynthesis. And you still want to hold it down so it's not going to blow away. And it's less dependent on the weather, so it's that no sunlight is killing the plants that are there. But it's not going to heat up. So that if there are weed seeds down an inch or so,
Also, it's not taking water, either one of them, they're not.
well, this is again a weed control method for a few weeks, or depending how bad the weed is, you do one. And then you can go in and pull it back. And when we've got a website that we can show you. But after a few weeks, then you pull it back and you may put another type of mulch down. You may have another weed control method, but this is trying to cut back on some of the present
problem you already had.
Yep. And then, how many people have seen on Facebook, I don't till my garden ever? Well, there are books, and actually I brought one of the books, The Weedless Gardening, and or Lasagna Gardening, and the thought behind, or there's straw mulch gardening is another one. There are all sorts of methods, and the idea is you make a permanent area where you're going to grow your vegetables. And in this case, laying down cardboard or newspapers and then layers of organic material, cardboard, newspapers, organic material. And you need to irrigate because the whole column has to be moist. And usually to do this, you start in the fall, so it has a chance to break down in the winter time. And then you plant in the top. Well, the trouble with these is if you have blackgrass, those roots will grow up. And I had straw bales. I thought, this is the answer, right? And I had blackgrass. But by the end of summer, it was mounded blackgrass. And you can't pull it out because it's in, they're in the straw mulch. So it was, that didn't work very well. So it's something that you might want to try. I've also seen where people lay out a tarp and cut permanent holes for their vegetables. And so then they only deal with the weeds in those permanent holes, and they have subsurface irrigation, to keep them moist. So, that's a method.
What do you think of laying down permanent, for instance, if it's plastic, I tried that even in where I walk between rows and leave it down for a year. But I always had the feeling that the ground needs to breathe. I just didn't like what might be happening underneath the plastic, and I tried once doing it on my raised beds, and I went, gee, I don't know, what do you think about leaving it down like that?
I don't think you're going to exclude the air.
Okay.
The air is, if your soil is good and aerated before you start,
okay.
the only way you're going to exclude the air is if you get in there and walk on it and compress the soil.
Right.
And putting a cover over it, you're not compressing the soil.
Right.
I wouldn't be concerned about it. But that doesn't mean if you wanted to, you could pull it back and kill it and pull it over.
Sure. No, it just seemed like things would get slimy or just not healthy underneath. I tried it one year and went, don't know if this feels right, so I wondered what you thought. Okay.
So biological control. And when people see this, it's like, yes, I want to get something to come out and eat all my weeds. Well, the trouble is, it's very specific on the type of weed. And so they have developed either, some pathogens or some insects, and this is a weevil that only feeds on a certain type of purple loosestrife. So if you wanted to release that weevil into your garden and you didn't have any purple loosestrife, it would die. And it's like, it didn't work. It wouldn't have done any work. So while it looks like it would be nice, again, it's very specific on the type of weed that they found something can control. And it's not widespread. It takes a lot of time to develop something like this. And companies aren't going to make a lot of money because once you've deployed it, it's like, yeah. So I guess just know that biological control, it's out there. It may not work as well. Now, herbicides in the garden. And the trouble with herbicides is they can be very specific or very general in what they control. And our concerns are that in a home garden, you have several different types of plants in a very small area. So you have a greater risk of the herbicide drifting to a susceptible plant. And when a home gardener applies herbicides, it's not as even as a farmer. A farmer can load up their sprayer. They know how fast their tractor is going. They know how much material is sprayed out, and they can make a very accurate application. A home gardener, it's like this. And if you need to be very careful about the dosage, you can get too little or too much, or not uniform. And many of the herbicides are sold in a great big container, 5 gallons, that a home gardener isn't going to use enough. You know, you need acres and acres and acres to actually utilize some of the large containers. That doesn't mean there aren't herbicides that home gardeners can use, and these are just some of them. And herbicide, there are organic herbicides and there are non-organic herbicides. And you see the term up there, pesticides / herbicide. A pesticide is any material that kills or mitigates a pest. Lori was talking about your homemade stuff. If it's killing or mitigating a pest, it's acting like a pesticide. So all herbicides are pesticides, but not all pesticides are herbicides. So there are different ways that the herbicides act. There are pre-emergent, which means these are materials that will prevent seeds from germinating. Notice I said seeds. So if you put one of these pre-emergents on your garden that you're planning to put seeds in, it will prevent your vegetable seeds from germinating too. And you can see there, corn gluten meal is considered an organic herbicide. And it will also provide some nutrients because it's organic material. But it will prevent seeds from germinating. So if you're planning to grow cucumbers and you spread corn gluten meal in your garden at this rate, you may prevent your cucumber seeds from germinating. But if you put out a pepper plant, either before or after you spread the corn gluten meal or any of these pre-emergents, it won't affect the pepper plant because there's no seeding volume. You're just putting the plant there. Post-emergent means it reacts on a live plant. And many of us have heard of 2,4-D. That's what a lot of lawn herbicides have in them. You may not be familiar with the vinegar or acetic acid, or you may have read, well, I'll just mix up some home vinegar and spray it out in the garden. Well, you notice this is 25% vinegar. The stuff we use from the store, 5% vinegar.
If it's for canning, it's 5, yes.
And sometimes it's 4%. So even if you're canning, you get a general percentage. And what that does, it burns the top part of the plant. It doesn't do anything for the roots. So the roots will still be there. The last material is a post-emergent systemic. So that means the plant has to be living, growing. And we spray it on the top, and it will translocate down into the roots. You may have heard of Roundup. The trouble with that, if you get any drift onto desirable plants, it can affect them. The other thing is, if you have weed seeds that are in the lawn and you spray Roundup, and just once Roundup or glyphosate has been in contact with soil, it deactivates. The soil makes it so it won't work. So if you use dirty water, it's not going to be effective. And it's also not effective against some plants. There are some tough plants that can withstand it. Glyphosate. But anyway, so if you plan to use herbicides in the garden, first thing, identify the weed. Make sure what you're dealing with. And make sure you decide that they're a problem. As Lori said, it maybe you can live with it. Think about other non-chemical methods. And we consider any pesticides our material of last resort. You should have tried some other stuff before you get down to pesticides. Read and follow the label. The label is the law. Timing is important. Remember, if it's pre-emergent, post-emergent, you're trying to get it to translocate. That's all important. So there. And we've got the little card that Lori handed out to evaluate our program to see how helpful it was. And we do have some weed control resources that Lori talked about already. And we'll send out links to all of these. And we have handouts. We can pick up handouts. I've got a handout on vegetable weed control, and one on small fruits in the middle there, and one on cover crops. Or if you want to wait for the electronic version, you can wait for the electronic version. If you prefer not to carry paper, that's an option too.
The first one coming around is the green manures and cover crops. Then I have weeds in home vegetable garden. And then we have weed management in small food crops.
Yeah.
Small fruit.
Yeah, just so you all leave, I want to. If you filled out the blue card, we can draw for our big card.
Yeah.
Did you fill out a blue card?
Yes.
Show a pencil.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's
Okay.
my fault.
Thank you.
Are there any questions we didn't answer?
Yeah, Don, I have a question. It's not weeds though.
Yeah?
Last year I planted 2 rows about 3 weeks apart, 2 weeks apart, string beans. Got to the dicot stage, and they got about this tall to the first true leaves. And all of a sudden they got decapitated. And
Next month,
Yeah.
we're talking about animals in the garden.
that's what I was thinking. They did see paw prints, and the gate doesn't go all the way down to the ground. And they never fell over, so first I thought maybe it was slugs, but there's no holes. Then I thought maybe it was cutworms, but that cutworm would really have to stretch up. Then I was thinking, probably my skunk.
Animals, it could have been.
That's what I think. But every one, I lost 2 full rows of them. Never had the problem before. But I got this, not my woodchuck, 'cause Charlie never touched a thing.
Uh-huh.
But I've had skunks.
That's what you think. I think it's Charlie.
I don't think so, because his had one den right next to the garden, never went in.
You never know. And so next month, we have, I forget the date, but it's animals in the garden, yay or nay. Because some people want to attract wildlife. We like
Yeah.
birds. We like squirrels.
Eat all your raspberries and your blueberries.
Some of us purchase ducks to come in. You know. I can't wait for this next program. It's going to be
Some
awesome.
people like the deer. They like to see deer.
What
I
does
feed
plan-
everybody.
What does plantain fall under for weed, like kind of weeds?
It's a broadleaf weed. I believe it's an annual. But it likes compacted soil. If you
Yeah.
notice, it will grow in driveways. It does really well.
Yeah, my grandmother's. It's all along the outer edge of a lot of areas there.
It holds the soil in place,
Yeah,
You know,
I
and-
left it for a while.
and it's green. And we have questions
Pick a
from
card,
some
any
people that
card.
have lawns.
All right.
You know, and they think they want a perfect grass lawn. It's like, do you want a grass lawn or do you want it just to be green?
We have a winner.
Woohoo!
It's Ashley.
Oh,
There you go.
Oh, thank you so
All
much.
right. Very good. Any other questions?
Do you have Weeds of the Northeast book for sale in the office?
We don't have extra copies in the office,
Oh.
but we can, you can order one, or if you go to a bookstore, if you're ever at a bookstore, they're usually in the bookstores. Or do they have one here at the library?
That's what I was just gonna look up if we.
I
That would be
had a
really
hard
handy.
time getting my hands on one, and so I have certain books in my wish list of thrift books online, and I just got a notice that they said some things on your wish list are available, and that some of them were Weeds of the Northeast. So
Remember when I took the Master Gardener course, you kept telling about that, and I should have bought it back then.
it's getting it's hugely popular.
Yeah.
Well, Newcomb's is another book that, folks use.
Looks like we do not have it, but
You do not?
we can order it in.
Woohoo!
It's from Thorndike
Woohoo!
at COA.
These are both that we have the Master Gardeners have. This
Oh,
one's
okay.
pretty neat, so this one is awesome. But like I said, thrift books. I think they may have been used, but still.
They do really well with books as well, even if they're used, they don't sell them unless they're in relatively good shape.
Yeah. So, couple of other bulletins that we have is the sustainable weed management for small and medium scale farms.
Those are extra copies that I made from years ago, and I thought you guys can use them. Good.
I think you should all take one, and then you can also experiment with paper as a news area. No, but no, this one is great. You know,
I took her seriously there.
I was serious. I
You're
do.
serious.
I do. I am.
It is
I
a good
use.
weed
I
barrier.
do use paper
should
as a
use
weed
weed
barrier.
I do newspaper, but I don't generally use something that small, because come on, it's gonna blow away faster than you can put a rock on it.
So you remember earlier when I was saying how much fun it is to have the burner and make the holes in the.
Okay.
Some of them might be a little big.
Oh, okay,
This
and then you put
It's great to go around, my seedlings. So, but if you would like,
Actually,
and the
you
other one
just
is
go
weed
out and
ecology.
buy a pound of carrots.
Start this one around as well. So, I have a question. Oh, yes, pollinators. So, also, all those lovely weeds we were talking about that, can also provide food for pollinators, and that it's only a weed if it's where we don't want it to be growing. With our pollinator-friendly garden program, and also this is going to be coming out as a training as well, hopefully early summer. The pollinators need those natives. So, even though we want to control these weeds in the areas where we're reserving them for other uses, it's still important to keep those native weeds. I'm going to call them native weeds. That's what I should start calling them, is native weeds. But with the pollinator friendly garden certification, if you're looking for kind of a shortcut to start identifying some of the plants on your property too, actually the application itself is a great resource, because we have the botanical name and the common name. So if you're trying to identify some things and you know the common name, this will give you the botanical name. So then, you can go back to one of these resources. So if anyone would like an application, first of all, to apply to have your garden certified as pollinator friendly, or to use that as a resource, the web page that goes along with this is super helpful. It has lots of ID tools on it, links to ID tools, lots of information on the natives. I'll pass this around as well. Does anybody have any other questions? No?
We're all gonna start eating our weeds.
Making tea with them and
Dandelions they're like such a useful weed, but you don't want to get rid of them too much. Because you can use so many, like the flower, the root, and the leaves.
And you've seen there's a big push, I've already started starting the no mow May. And the idea is don't mow your lawn until and so that will give the chance for some of our native plants to bloom. And so yes, you may have a lawn that's all yellow, but you can tell your friends and neighbors that you're feeding the pollinators.
I think that there are still, I'm not sure how you get them, but there are still signs that you can get that indicate you're observing no mow May. But there are other signs that I've seen that I would like to get, but it says like things like little signs that say pardoning the weeds, I'm feeding the bees, things like that. So, people don't think that you just have a broken lawnmower or something. It's a conscious effort.
But we do understand there are some people that are allergic to bees, and so you may see some public areas, they'll mow a lot of the area, but they'll leave a section that they don't mow. So that's how they're trying to bridge the gap. Do a little bit of both.
Flip chart is my level of expertise.
No questions?
That was wonderful.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. And remember, for the resources, you can reach out to the extension for help with ID and.
Oh, we had suggested if you had a picture of a plant you wanted to identify, you could bring it, but it's like, there's
Yeah.
snow out, so I didn't think.
No, that's white mulch.
There you go.
Yeah.
And along the street, it's dirty white mulch.
That's perfect. I like it.
Free rainfall,
There you go.
But no, I do, I was serious, I do use the smaller pieces of paper as well,
Sure.
for different things. I mean,
I'm usually trying to cover larger areas to prevent the weeds, but I see if you're using it through mulch or stuff like that, because by all means it would be useful.
yeah, I have
I
seen
just-
on a lot of different advertisements, the large rolls of the paper you can just roll out, or like even a thin cardboard layer that you can just
Yeah.
roll it right out, and it's like, I think of me out there with all my bits and pieces of cardboard trying to keep them all down. And
Yeah.
at the same time, I'm like, wow, must be really nice to just roll it all out.
I have to tell you, when it first came out, I tried some
Did you?
in my garden, and it lays out beautifully, and after a rain, it tightens up, and oh my God, it's so beautiful. At the time, I had 2 Labradors, and I just made one trip through it, and
just-
told. It's like, it's paper, it was paper.
Yeah.
I did try some of that as well. I splurged 1 year, and I liked it because it lasted long enough to get past my problem weeds, and by then my squash and everything had come out and had just covered everything. So I liked it. It didn't last very long. So I did like that, but it was very thin. But this stuff that I'm seeing now is like a corrugated thin cardboard, but it's like a packing material. I've gotten things in the mail where they just same thing was just wrapped around some books or whatever. Good stuff.
Well, thank you.
I've got some carpeting in the section in front of my greenhouse. Been trying to pull the grass so I can put it in a perennial garden. My sister's gone, so I stripped it. 5 of us stripped plants at her house, and we're gonna use the greenhouse this year, I guess, just for holding plants. Yeah. So I got from a friend. I've got about 20-foot pieces of 2 of them, carpeting about 3 to 4 feet wide, and I've moved it all over the place.